I thought I was just visiting my friend, until his mom leaned closer, smiled, and whispered, "You look nervous. I'll help you relax." I still remember the first time I really noticed her. Not in the casual way I had before, when I'd stop by my friend's house and offer a polite hello before heading straight to his room. No, this was different. That day, my friend had run upstairs to grab something he'd forgotten, leaving me standing awkwardly in the living room. And that's when she walked in. His mom. She carried herself with this calm assurance, the kind that comes from someone who knows exactly who she is. She wasn't trying to be noticed, but somehow every movement drew my eyes. The faint sound of her bracelet jingling as she adjusted something on the shelf. The way a loose strand of hair slipped across her cheek before she tucked it back behind her ear. I must have looked completely out of place, standing there stiffly, because the moment her eyes met mine, she tilted her head and smiled, not in a forced way, but warmly, as though she could see straight through the nervousness I was trying to hide. "You look nervous," she said, her tone light, teasing. "Don't worry, I don't bite." The words shouldn't have meant much. They were casual, playful. But in that moment, they carried a weight I couldn't explain. My throat tightened, and all I could manage was a half-smile that probably looked more awkward than charming. Her laughter followed, soft but melodic, and it filled the quiet space between us. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, something floral, understated, yet lingering in the air like a whisper. It wasn't overwhelming, but it wrapped around me, made me aware of every breath I was taking. I tried to focus on something else, the painting on the wall, the pattern in the rug, even the ticking clock, but my gaze kept returning to her. There was something magnetic in the way her presence shifted the entire room. For the first time, I wasn't just looking at my friend's mom. I was really seeing her. The elegance in the curve of her smile, the quiet confidence in her posture, and the warmth in her eyes that seemed to hold stories I couldn't begin to imagine. I realized then why I felt nervous. It wasn't because I was out of place. It was because something about her unsettled me in the best possible way. By the time my friend came clattering back down the stairs, I'd forced myself into a casual stance, pretending I hadn't just been caught in her gravity. But her eyes lingered on me for one last second, a knowing glimmer sparking there, and I knew this was only the beginning. When my friend rushed out to take a quick call, I suddenly found myself alone with her again. The living room felt too quiet, every tick of the clock a reminder of the space we now shared. I sank back into the chair, pretending to scroll through my phone, though my focus was anywhere but the screen. She moved with an ease that made the silence less heavy. Carrying a folded blanket to the couch, she smoothed it out with graceful hands before settling across from me. I caught her eyes for a moment, and she smiled, gentle, patient, as though she was inviting me to breathe instead of holding everything so tightly inside. "So," she began, her voice light but genuine, "how are things going for you these days? Classes? Work? I don't think I've asked in a while." Her question startled me more than it should have. Most adults ask out of politeness, their attention already drifting before you've finished answering. But she didn't look away. Her gaze held steady, curious, as if whatever I said actually mattered. I stumbled to a reply about late-night studying, about plans that still felt uncertain. She listened the entire time, her chin resting lightly in her hand, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You remind me of when I was your age," she said softly. "Everything felt so big, like every choice would decide the rest of my life." She chuckled faintly, shaking her head. "It's strange how those feelings stay with you, even years later." Her words settled into me like something warm. She wasn't just talking to fill the air, she was sharing a piece of herself. And I realized how rare it was for someone to listen like this, without judgment or distraction. As the conversation went on, I began to relax. My hands stopped fidgeting. My voice found its steadiness. And yet, with every exchange, I felt more aware of the subtle nearness between us. When she leaned forward to set her cup on the table, her hand brushed just a little too close to mine. It wasn't intentional. Or maybe it was. But the faint warmth of her skin stirred something sharp and undeniable. I froze, caught between wanting to pull back and wanting to stay there forever. She glanced up, catching my hesitation, and instead of pulling away, she held the moment in silence. Not with pressure, not with expectation, just with an ease that made me feel seen, not small. For the first time, I wasn't thinking of her as my friend's mom. I was thinking of her as her, a woman whose laughter softened a room, whose eyes lingered like a secret, and whose presence made me want to stay right where I was. I thought I was doing a decent job of keeping myself composed, but apparently not. My fingers kept tapping the side of my glass, a steady rhythm I couldn't quiet. Every so often, I shifted in my seat, glancing at the door as though my friend might rescue me from my own nerves. That's when I caught her watching me. Not in a sharp or critical way. Her eyes held a quiet amusement, like she was enjoying a private joke. She tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into that kind of smile that always makes you wonder what she's thinking. "You look nervous," she said, her voice calm but threaded with playfulness. She let the words linger before adding with a grin, "Don't worry. I'll help you relax." My heart skipped a beat. She laughed lightly, clearly meaning it as a tease, but I could feel the weight of it settle inside me, a warmth spreading through my chest. I tried to laugh too, though it came out awkward, rougher than I intended. "You notice," I muttered, rubbing the back of my neck, trying to mask how flustered I felt. "Oh, it's impossible not to," she teased back. "The way you keep fidgeting, it's like you're waiting for a job interview, not just sitting in a living room." Her words were playful, but there was something else in her tone, a softness that didn't let me feel mocked. Instead, it felt like she was pulling me into her orbit, gently unraveling the tension I'd wrapped around myself. I forced myself to meet her eyes. That was the mistake, or maybe the turning point. Because when I did, I realized just how much depth was there. She wasn't just being kind or curious. She was present. And that made my pulse race harder than any joke she could make. She leaned back into the couch, her arm draped casually across the backrest, as though the entire room belonged to her. It probably did. But the way she looked at me, it felt like her attention belonged to me too. "You don't have to be so tense," she said more softly now, almost like a reassurance. "This is your second home, isn't it?" I nodded, but the truth was, I'd never felt the room quite like this before. Not until she turned it into something charged, something alive. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was thick with the kind of awareness you can't explain. Every movement felt amplified. The way she crossed her legs, the faint sound of her bracelet against her wrist, the way her eyes lingered for half a second longer than necessary. And I knew then, her teasing wasn't just to make me laugh. It was to draw me closer, to test how I would respond. After her teasing, I thought I'd be left spinning in silence, but she didn't let the moment hang too long. With a graceful push off the couch, she stood and asked if I wanted tea or coffee. I almost declined, out of nervousness more than anything, but the kindness in her voice made me nod. "Tea's fine," I said, my voice quieter than I meant. She smiled, not pressing, just turning toward the kitchen with that calm confidence that seemed to trail behind her. I followed a moment later, not wanting to sit frozen in the living room while she moved out of sight. The kitchen felt warmer somehow, filled with soft light spilling through the window. She moved with a kind of practiced rhythm, reaching for mugs, setting the kettle on, opening a jar of tea leaves. Each small action was unhurried, almost graceful. I leaned against the counter, pretending to be casual, though every sound, the click of the kettle switch, the clink of porcelain, felt sharper in the quiet. "You know," she said after a pause, her back still to me, "I sometimes forget how much noise this house makes when it's full. And then, when it's quiet like this," she trailed off, placing the mugs gently on the counter, "I notice how much space there really is." There was something in her voice, soft, reflective, that made me look at her differently in that moment. Not just the elegant woman who carried herself with confidence, but someone who knew what it was like to feel the weight of silence. I didn't know what to say, but I didn't have to. She turned then, smiling faintly, her eyes carrying both warmth and something deeper, unspoken. She slid one mug toward me once the tea was ready, her fingers brushing mine as she let go of the handle. The touch was brief, but it sent a quiet spark through me all the same. "Thank you," I murmured. "You're welcome," she said softly, almost as if the words meant more than just handing me tea. For a moment, we simply stood there, the steam rising between us. I could see how the light caught strands of her hair, the way it framed her face, the way her expression softened when she looked at me. She laughed lightly then, breaking the tension but not pushing it away. "I didn't mean to get all serious on you," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I guess I just talk too much sometimes." But I didn't think so. If anything, I wanted her to keep going, to keep letting me see those pieces of her that slipped past the teasing and the small talk. Because in that kitchen, with the quiet hum of the kettle behind us and the closeness between us, I realized something had shifted. She wasn't just drawing me in with playfulness anymore. She was letting me see her. And that made all the difference. The tea warmed my hands, but it wasn't the drink that held my attention. It was her. Standing close enough for me to notice the faint brush of her sleeve against my arm, close enough that the soft scent of her perfume threaded through the steam rising between us. She lifted her mug, sipping slowly, her eyes meeting mine over the rim. There was something steady in her gaze, something that made it hard to look away. I told myself to focus on anything else, the shelves behind her, the fading light outside the window, but every time I blinked, I found her watching me again. When she finally set her mug down, she turned slightly toward me, and in that shift, her hand grazed mine. It wasn't deliberate at first, just a small, passing touch, but neither of us moved right away. Her skin was warm, her fingers light against me, and for a moment, it felt as if time itself paused to take notice. My breath caught. I didn't pull away, though part of me thought I should. Instead, I let the warmth linger, tracing its way from my hand all the way through my chest. She glanced down at where our hands nearly overlapped, then back up at me, a knowing softness in her eyes. Not a challenge, not a dare, just an acknowledgement. Like she was silently asking if I felt it too. I managed a faint smile, though my throat was dry. "Guess I really am nervous," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her lips curved, not into laughter this time, but something gentler. "That's not a bad thing," she replied. Her voice was low, steady. "It just means you're paying attention." The words sank deep. They weren't meant to tease. They were meant to reassure, to steady me in a way no one else had. And in that moment, the nervous energy that had been twisting inside me began to feel different. It wasn't discomfort anymore. It was awareness. Her fingers brushed mine again as she reached for her mug, lingering just long enough to make me wonder if it was on purpose this time. The touch left a trace of warmth even after she pulled away, like an echo that refused to fade. We both sipped in silence, but the air between us wasn't silent at all. It was filled with unspoken things, thick enough to press against my skin. Every glance, every pause, every small movement carried weight now. I realized then that what we shared wasn't something loud or obvious. It was subtle, quiet, hidden in the spaces between words and touches. And somehow, that made it feel even more powerful. As she placed her empty mug on the counter, her hand brushed against mine once more, and this time, she didn't move away right away. Her eyes met mine, holding steady, and I knew we had crossed into something neither of us could ignore. Later, we found ourselves back in the living room. The daylight had begun to soften, stretching warm colors across the walls, and the quiet hum of the house felt heavier somehow. My friend still hadn't returned, and with every passing minute, it felt as though the space belonged only to us. She settled on the couch, curling one leg beneath her with a comfort that spoke of habit. I hesitated for a moment before sitting down beside her. Not too close, but close enough that I could feel the faint brush of warmth where our shoulders almost touched. The conversation began simply, half-hearted remarks about the weather, about how quickly the week had gone by. But as the minutes stretched, the words thinned, replaced by pauses. Those pauses carried more than sentences ever could. At one point, she turned toward me, her arm resting along the back of the couch. The movement narrowed the space between us, and suddenly, I was acutely aware of everything: the soft rise and fall of her breathing, the faint line of perfume that clung to her blouse, the way her eyes lingered just long enough to make my pulse stumble. "You've gone quiet again," she said gently, her voice carrying that same mix of teasing and kindness. I swallowed hard, forcing a small smile. "Maybe I don't know what to say." Her lips curved into something softer than a grin, more patient than a laugh. "Sometimes silence says more than words." The way she said it made my chest tighten. I let the quiet settle again, and this time, I didn't try to fight it. Her shoulder brushed mine, so lightly it could have been accidental. But she didn't move away. Neither did I. The contact was subtle, but it sent a current through me, steady and undeniable. I shifted slightly, enough that our arms touched fully now, fabric against fabric. I felt her inhale, the smallest intake of breath, and the sound filled the stillness like a secret. My heart pounded, and for a moment, I thought I might actually lean in. The pull between us was that strong, an invisible line stretched tight, daring me to cross it. But I didn't. Neither of us did. Instead, we sat there in the thick silence, every glance, every brush of contact more charged than if words had been spoken. She finally exhaled softly, her gaze holding mine just a moment longer before she looked away. The smallest smile touched her lips, quiet, knowing. And in that fragile closeness, I realized something important. It wasn't about rushing forward. It was about being here, in this moment, letting the weight of what was unspoken grow stronger with every heartbeat. We hadn't crossed the line yet. But we were standing right at the edge of it, together. The sound of the front door unlocking startled us both, though neither of us moved right away. My friend's voice drifted in from the entryway, breaking the stillness that had wrapped so tightly around us. For one suspended heartbeat, she and I stayed exactly where we were, shoulders brushing, silence still humming with all that had gone unsaid. Then she eased back slightly, her composure returning as effortlessly as slipping on a familiar coat. Still, before she rose, she let her hand rest briefly on my arm. The touch was light, but it steadied me, anchored me in the swirl of noise that returned with my friend's arrival. "You'll be fine," she murmured, her words meant for me alone. Her eyes held mine, soft and certain, before she stood and moved toward the kitchen as though nothing unusual had just passed between us. I sat frozen, trying to steady my breathing. My friend bounded into the room, full of energy, oblivious to the undercurrent I was still caught in. He talked about something on his phone, laughing, gesturing wildly. I nodded along, but my focus was elsewhere. From across the room, she reappeared with a casual smile, placing a bowl of snacks on the table. To anyone else, it would have looked ordinary, routine. But when she passed behind me, her hand rested briefly on my shoulder, fingers curling just enough to linger. It was nothing my friend would notice, but everything I could feel. The warmth of that small gesture sank deep, a quiet reassurance that what I'd felt wasn't imagined. She knew it too. As the evening carried on, I caught her glances, subtle, fleeting, but undeniable. There was no regret in them, no retreat. Only a kind of quiet tenderness, like she was acknowledging a bond we both understood but wouldn't name aloud. When it was time for me to leave, I stood near the door, my friend rummaging for his keys. She approached, calm and composed, her smile gentle. "Take care of yourself," she said softly, her eyes holding mine for just a beat longer than they should have. Then, in a motion so natural it could have been mistaken for simple kindness, she gave my arm a light squeeze. Warmth pressed through me, grounding me in a way words couldn't. As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, the memory of her touch lingered, as did the weight of her gaze. It wasn't a goodbye. It wasn't even an ending. It was a beginning, unspoken, fragile, and powerful. Something that didn't need to be rushed or named to be real. And as I walked away, I knew with absolute certainty, this was only the start of a connection that would grow, quietly and deeply, with time.